The smell started in summer. At first, nobody paid attention. In North Philadelphia, bad smells were normal. Dead cats, old garbage, broken pipes. These things happened all the time. But this smell was different. It was thick, heavy, and getting worse every day. The smell came from the third floor of 1811 North 19th Street, a crumbling apartment building where screams were more common than sleep, where every stair creaked under the weight of broken dreams. The building was home to forgotten people, drug addicts, sex workers, and others that society had given up on. On the third floor lived a thin, quiet man everyone called Marty. He walked with a limp and was rarely seen without his bright blue Cookie Monster puppet. Most people thought he was harmless, just another lost soul in a city full of them. Odd, yes, but harmless. Until the summer heat made the walls sweat something terrible. Until complaints flooded in. Until the landlord finally broke down that door. What they found inside would change everything. What they discovered would make this one of Philadelphia's most shocking crimes ever. The building at 1811, North 19th Street, was falling apart, just like everything else in North Philadelphia. Paint peeled from the walls like old skin. Stairs groaned with every step. The hallways smelled like mold, sweat, and despair. It was the kind of place people went to disappear from the world. This was 1987, and crack cocaine had turned North Philadelphia into a war zone. Violence was everywhere. People vanished all the time. Nobody asked too many questions. In this neighborhood, minding your own business wasn't just smart, it was survival. Among all these forgotten souls lived a man who seemed different from the rest. His real name was Harrison Frank Graham, but everyone called him Marty. He was thin, soft-spoken, and walked with a noticeable limp. He always carried a bright blue Cookie Monster puppet everywhere he went. The puppet had wide, innocent eyes and a cheerful smile that seemed out of place in such a dark neighborhood. Marty was polite when neighbors passed him in the hallway. He sometimes asked to borrow cigarettes. His voice was gentle, almost like a child's. He seemed harmless, maybe even a little sad. People felt sorry for him more than afraid of him. What they didn't know was that behind his innocent appearance and childlike behavior, something terrible was growing. Harrison Frank Graham was born on September 9th, 1959, right there in North Philadelphia. He grew up just a few miles from where he would later commit his crimes. He was the oldest of 5 children, but also the quietest and most troubled. His teachers said he was slow to learn. Tests showed his IQ was only 63, just above the level doctors call intellectual disability. While other kids played games and made friends, Harrison preferred watching cartoons and listening to disco music. He loved that blue puppet more than anything else in the world. He took it everywhere, talked through it when he couldn't find his own words. He named it Mr. Cookie. The puppet became his best friend, his confidant, his voice when he had no voice. Some neighborhood kids made fun of him for carrying a puppet around, but most people just ignored him completely. When Harrison was a teenager, he quietly dropped out of school. There were no graduation photos, no goodbye parties, no plans for the future. He just faded into the background of North Philadelphia's forgotten people. Nobody seemed to notice. Nobody seemed to care. With no education, no job skills, and no real family support, Harrison disappeared into a world of late-night television, cheap snacks, and long conversations with his worn blue puppet. He talked to the puppet more than he talked to real people. The puppet seemed to understand him better than humans ever could. At first, Harrison used pills to calm the constant buzzing in his head. Then came heroin, which gave him peaceful, sleepy hours away from the harsh reality of his life. But when crack cocaine exploded through North Philadelphia in the early 1980s, it hit Harrison like a freight train. Everything that was left of his already fragile mind began to fall apart. He used his monthly disability checks to buy drugs. Sometimes he traded his food money for just one more hit. He would disappear for days at a time, lost in a haze of smoke and broken thoughts. His family stopped checking on him. His few friends drifted away. He became completely isolated from the world. Somewhere in that cloud of drugs and madness, something inside Harrison's mind snapped. He crossed a line that decent people never cross. Harrison eventually rented a small apartment on the third floor of 1811 North 19th Street. The building was perfect for people who wanted to disappear. It barely had working utilities. The landlord didn't ask many questions as long as the rent got paid. Most tenants were drug addicts, prostitutes, or others living on society's edges. Harrison turned his apartment into something strange and disturbing. He never cleaned anything. He let garbage pile up like walls around his home. He nailed the windows shut so nobody could see inside. He lived like a hermit, only coming out when he needed cigarettes or drugs. Inside that sealed apartment, time seemed to stop moving. The women who would later become Harrison's victims were society's most forgotten people, just like him. Most were prostitutes struggling with drug addiction. Others were homeless women looking for a safe place to sleep. They were people that the world had already given up on. People who could disappear without anyone asking too many questions. Harrison didn't hunt these women down like some killers do. He didn't drag them off the street or trick them into his apartment. They came willingly. He offered them a safe place to crash for the night. He offered free drugs or a hot meal. His voice was always soft and gentle, almost childlike. Sometimes he introduced them to his puppet. Sometimes he let the puppet do the talking. But something terrible happened when the drugs wore off and reality came back. Something inside Harrison's broken mind would snap. The women would become real to him again instead of just objects. They would make noise, ask questions, want to leave. And Mr. Cookie, according to Harrison, didn't like that. What happened next in that sealed apartment was unspeakable. But the women never left. One by one, over the course of about a year, they entered Harrison's apartment and never came out again. Some neighbors heard arguments through the thin walls. Others heard loud music playing at strange hours. One person reported hearing someone talking late at night, but nobody could tell who was answering back. The first signs that something was wrong came in the spring of 1987. A young woman named Robin had been Harrison's girlfriend for a few months. She was a prostitute and drug addict, but she had family who cared about her. When she suddenly stopped calling her mother, people started asking questions. But Robin had vanished into Harrison's apartment, and nobody knew to look there. More women began disappearing around the same time. Barbara, only 22 years old, had been working the streets to support her drug habit. Sandra, a mother of two, had been missing for weeks before anyone filed a police report. Cynthia had been gone for over 6 months. These women lived dangerous lives, so people assumed they had just moved on or met with the usual street violence. But they hadn't moved on. They were all inside Harrison's apartment, and Harrison was living with them in ways that no sane person could imagine. He didn't panic after what he did to them. He didn't try to move them or hide them. He simply stepped over them and continued living his life. He slept near them. He ate meals near them. He played loud music to cover the sound of flies. As the weeks and months passed, Harrison's apartment became something from a nightmare. The smell grew stronger and stronger. He lit candles and sprayed cheap air freshener, but nothing could hide the stench of death. He piled garbage higher and higher, maybe trying to bury the evidence, or maybe just because he had completely lost touch with reality. Neighbors began complaining about the smell in the spring of 1987. At first, they blamed the usual suspects: dead animals, rotting garbage, broken sewer pipes. The landlord ignored most complaints because tenants were always complaining about something. But as summer arrived and the heat grew intense, the smell became impossible to ignore. People in the building started getting sick. They couldn't eat. They couldn't sleep. The stench would hit them in waves, especially when the wind blew a certain way. Some tenants threatened to move out if something wasn't done. Others called the city health department. The pressure on the landlord grew stronger every day. Meanwhile, Harrison kept living his normal routine as if nothing was wrong. Neighbors saw him coming and going from the building. He still asked to borrow cigarettes. He still spoke in that soft, childlike voice. He still carried his blue puppet everywhere. One neighbor later told police they heard him having conversations through the apartment wall late at night. They assumed he was talking to a girlfriend or roommate. They never guessed he was talking to the dead. But even Harrison couldn't hide what was happening inside that sealed room forever. The summer heat of 1987 made the smell unbearable. Complaints flooded the landlord's office daily. Harrison stopped answering his door when people knocked. He missed his rent payments for the first time. The landlord decided enough was enough. In August 1987, armed with an eviction notice and accompanied by a police officer, the landlord went to Harrison's apartment. They knocked loudly and demanded he open the door. When nobody answered, they could hear strange rustling sounds from deep inside. The landlord used his master key to unlock the door, but it wouldn't open. Something was blocking it from the inside. They had to push hard, shoving aside piles of garbage that had been stacked against the entrance. As the door finally swung open, the smell hit them like a physical force. Both men immediately started gagging and had to step back. What they saw inside that apartment was beyond their worst nightmares. Garbage was piled waist-high throughout the entire space. Old food containers, empty beer bottles, used drug needles, broken furniture, and children's toys were scattered everywhere like the remains of some terrible storm. The air was thick and still, heavy with the stench of decay. But it wasn't the garbage that made even experienced police officers sick to their stomachs. Hidden under mattresses, stuffed into closets, and buried beneath piles of trash were 7 human bodies. 7 women who had entered this apartment alive and never left. Some of the bodies were so badly decomposed, they were barely recognizable as human. The summer heat, combined with the sealed windows and lack of air circulation, had turned the apartment into an oven. Flesh had melted and fused to the floor. Bones had separated from decaying tissue. The scene was like something from the worst horror movie ever made. And there, sitting among all the death and decay, was the Cookie Monster puppet. Its bright blue fabric was stained with blood and other things too horrible to describe. Its wide, innocent eyes seemed to be watching everything. Its cheerful cartoon smile made the scene feel even more grotesque and unreal. But when police and the landlord came looking for answers, Harrison was nowhere to be found. He had somehow known they were coming. Maybe he had been watching from his window. Maybe he had finally realized he couldn't hide the truth any longer. Whatever the reason, he had climbed out his window and down the fire escape, disappearing into the streets of Philadelphia like a ghost. The police immediately launched a massive manhunt. They searched every crack house, every abandoned building, every place Harrison might hide. They questioned his family members, his few remaining friends, anyone who might know where he had gone. But Harrison had vanished without a trace. For 3 days, one of Philadelphia's most wanted men walked free while the city learned about the horrors inside his apartment. News reporters swarmed the building. Curious crowds gathered outside. Police officers worked around the clock to remove the bodies and process the crime scene. The smell was so bad that investigators had to wear special masks and take frequent breaks. Then, on a quiet Tuesday morning, something unexpected happened. Harrison Frank Graham walked into a Philadelphia police station and calmly turned himself in. He told the desk officer that there were bodies in his apartment and that he needed help. He said he didn't understand why he had done what he did. During his confession, Harrison spoke in the same soft, childlike voice that neighbors remembered. He showed almost no emotion. He explained that the women had upset Mr. Cookie by being too loud or difficult. He said they wouldn't leave when he asked them to. He described the killings as if they had been someone else's actions, as if he had been watching from outside his own body. Harrison handed over his apartment keys and then gave the police his Cookie Monster puppet, as if that small blue toy could somehow explain the horror he had created. He sat quietly while detectives asked him questions, answering in simple words and short sentences. He couldn't explain why he had done it. He just knew that he had. The investigation revealed the full scope of Harrison's crimes. 7 women had died in the department over the course of about a year. During the cleanup process, a sanitation worker discovered a green duffel bag that had been left on the building's rooftop. Inside were dismembered body parts, legs, feet, and portions of a torso that had been carefully cut apart. When police returned to search the building's basement, they found additional remains: a partial skull, pelvic bones, and ribs. This woman, whose identity remains unknown even today, had been chopped into pieces and scattered throughout the building. Nobody knows how long her remains had been there. Maybe months, maybe even longer. All this time, while 7 women rotted inside his apartment, Harrison had been living among them as if nothing was wrong. He slept in the same room with corpses. He ate meals surrounded by death. He carried on conversations with his puppet while bodies decomposed just a few feet away. It was a level of madness that most people couldn't even imagine. Harrison's defense team immediately pushed for an insanity plea. He had an IQ of only 63, barely above the level of intellectual disability. Multiple psychiatrists diagnosed him with severe mental impairments. He couldn't even spell his own name correctly on legal documents. He seemed more like a confused child than a calculated killer. But when the case went to trial in 1988, the jury wasn't convinced. They had seen the crime scene photographs. They had heard testimony about the evidence of planning and concealment. They knew about the 7 women who had died horrible deaths. The pictures of rotting corpses and the testimony about months of living with the dead was too much for them to overlook. The courtroom was packed when the verdict was announced. Harrison Frank Graham was found guilty on all charges and sentenced to death 6 times, plus 1 life sentence. The room fell completely silent when the judge read the sentences. No gasps, no crying, just heavy, suffocating quiet like everyone had forgotten how to breathe. Harrison didn't react at all to the verdict. He sat perfectly still in his orange prison jumpsuit, eyes half closed, the same blank expression he had worn throughout the entire trial. It was as if none of it had anything to do with him, as if someone else had committed these crimes and he was just an innocent bystander. For the next 15 years, Harrison's case was buried in legal appeals and court challenges. Psychiatrists, public defenders, and judges argued about what it really means to be legally insane. They debated whether his childlike behavior was genuine or an elaborate act. They questioned whether a man with the mental capacity of a young child could truly understand death or deserve to die for his crimes. Then, in 2002, the United States Supreme Court made a landmark decision that changed everything. In Atkins versus Virginia, the court declared that executing mentally disabled individuals was unconstitutional, regardless of their crimes. If someone couldn't understand what death meant or why it was happening to them, the state wasn't allowed to execute them. Today, Harrison Frank Graham remains locked away in SCI Phoenix, a maximum security prison in Pennsylvania. He is now in his mid-60s and spends his days in a psychiatric unit under constant observation. Guards describe him as quiet, strange, and completely disconnected from reality. He rarely speaks to anyone. This tragic story teaches us to stay aware of the people around us. Share this story to help others stay aware of such dangerous people and crimes. Subscribe to our channel for more true crime stories that could save your life.